Please like and subscribe. You can't take what's not yours. You just can't. I learned that lesson the hard way. I was a little girl, probably 10 years old, and I was riding bikes down to the corner store, Mr. Horner's, with my girlfriend Gab. By the way, Gab was my friend who was a girl. This was back in the day before girls had girlfriends. At least before my daughter did. Anyhow, I told my mama I wanted some bubblegum. So she gave me money for some bubblegum, 2 decks of cards, and a pickle.
Here you go, honey.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That's child abuse. But you gotta remember, this was back in the days before you couldn't send 2 girls to the corner store without some pervert making them their girlfriends. Anyhow, once me and my girlfriend Gab got down to Mr. Horner's corner store, my girlfriend Gab grabbed me by the arm and told me she wanted some gum too.
I want some gum too.
I told her shoot,
Girl.
because I didn't have enough money to get her any gum. So I gave Gab a look like this. And then Gab looked back and forth to make sure Mr. Horner wasn't looking. And I stuck a stick of gum, smack, right in my pocket. I know. I can hardly believe it myself, but there's more to this story. We headed out of Horner's, hopped on our bikes, and were halfway home when I caught a glimpse of a bracelet which Gab had on her right hand. It said, "What would Jesus do?" See, this was back in the day when people thought about what Jesus would do. So I said to Gab, "Shoot, we gotta go back." She said, "Why?" And I told Gab, "You can't take what's not yours." She stared at me sideways. "Who you calling you? You're the one who took it. I just watched." That's the way Gab was. So she just watched as I hopped onto my bicycle with tears streaming down my face to go do what Jesus would do. I marched back inside Mr. Horner's corner store like I was marching into Guantanamo Bay. Of course, this was before we needed a Guantanamo Bay, but even then, I was feeling like they might just build one just for me. Still, consequences be darned. I saddled up to the counter and put 2 decks of cards, a pickle, and a half-chewed piece of bubblegum on Mr. Horner's counter. He said, "What's all this?" I told him it's gum, 2 decks of cards, and a pickle. He said, "I see that. I just sold it to you. Are you wanting your money back?" I told him, "No, I want you to keep it and the money." He said, "Now why would you want that?" I said, "Because wanting that is what Jesus would do." You see, I had stolen enough courage to bring myself back, but I couldn't bring myself to admit what I'd stolen. I said, "Oh, Mr. Horner, you give people so much stuff, but no one gives nothing to you." And I was halfway back to my bicycle before Mr. Horner said, "Yessie, why are you crying?" And of course I was crying, because I knew what Jesus would really want was for me to suffer for my sins. So I came out and said it. I said, "Mr. Horner, I'm going to come out and say it. I stole gum from your corner store." He said, "I know it. I saw you. I'll let you leave with it." I said, "Why?" He told me, "This world you kids is coming up in ain't the one what made me. When I was a boy, boys and girls did as they was told. My parents would say, clean the house, cook the dinner, go to the war. And then that was the end of my childhood. Those were literally the only things I did. Then when I came back, they said, we need a pickle and a deck of cards from the corner store. Go open one." And I've been here ever since. Nowadays, kids do what they want, take what they want. You did, but you came back. That takes guts. That's why instead of calling your mama right now, I'm gonna let you keep this gum and this pickle and even one of them decks of playing cards. I said, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Horner, but I don't want them anymore." And he said, "Don't talk back to me." You see, this was back when kids couldn't talk back to adults. And after he whipped me, he said, "Go ahead. I want you to chew that gum. I want you to blow a nice thick bubble for old Mr. Horner." Of course, I remember everything about that gum. Its consistency, so much harder than my teeth. Its taste, identical to chalk. And not even in the normal Bazooka Joe way. It tasted bitter. I was swallowing my shame and blowing it back out into nice thick bubbles for Mr. Horner. I even remember the little comic that came with it. Bazooka Joe had met his doppelganger. They were dressed the same and were literal mirror images of each other. The other boy was even left-handed. And Mort, Bazooka Joe's friend Mort, asked them, "So which one of you is the evil twin?" And the left-handed Bazooka Joe raised his left hand and said, "I don't know about evil, but I'm certainly worse with a pair of scissors." I remember thinking that wasn't funny at all, but it had tremendous implications for the Bazooka Joe universe. Then I read the fortune at the bottom, and it said, "You will soon learn a lesson the hard way." And I remember I didn't think about anything else after that. Then when I left the store to get on my bike, I saw that it had been stolen. Can you believe that? I couldn't even bring myself to tell my mama about it. I was still so ashamed at what I'd done. I stared at my bedroom door all night, worried she was about to open it up and say, "Mr. Horner called. Come get this whipping." I stared at that door so hard that I thought I had magic powers after midnight when I heard a knock come from the other side. Now that was already strange. This was back in the day when parents didn't knock. If they wanted something from you, they'd come in and darn sure take it. But there was a knock at my door, a hard knock. And I swallowed hard and tasted chalk. I crept up to the door, "Hello?" But there was no answer, so I let the door creak open. And I looked up, and I saw Mr. Horner staring down at me. I said, "Hello, Mr. Horner." He said, "Jesse, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I have something I have to confess to you." I said, "Okay." Then he became suddenly frustrated and said, "Well, are you gonna invite me in?" I said, "Okay." And he walked in, skin white as my teeth. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I seen him that morning. And Mr. Horner said, "Jesse, I have something I want to give you." And he produced an object which he'd been holding behind his back unbeknownst to me. It was a brand new bicycle, hot rod red, with lovely tassels as yellow as Mr. Horner's teeth. I said, "Mr. Horner, you bought me a new bicycle? Why?" And he said, It's what Jesus would have done." I said, "Mr. Horner, I don't think Jesus ever said anything about bicycles." And he said, "I suppose you're right, but I'm sure he'd have had a lot to say about him if he were alive today. I'm sure he'd have had a lot to say about a lot of things. I'm sure he'd take one look at our world and say the world was ending. I bet he'd be surprised we even lasted this long, and that there was a continent called America. Shame he didn't come back when we were still a country. A godly country, like we was back when I was a boy. If he came back now, folks probably wouldn't even recognize him. They'd probably hear him preach the gospel and walk right past, thinking, that's just another Arab grifter trying to get his. Then Jesus would probably say to himself, Jesus Christ, I can't believe this. The dang world must be coming to an end. In fact, that's almost certainly what he'd say, because if Jesus was alive and in America, then it would most certainly mean the rapture. I doubt he'd be surprised. Not that anything could surprise Jesus, but he was always talking about the rapture, you know. When the Son of God said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, did you think he was pulling Peter's leg? Funny, now you think about it, I guess even back in Jesus' time, people were talking about how the world was coming to an end. I suppose I can't blame them, though. I mean, they had recently crucified Christ. Still, the world kept spinning. I suppose every generation thinks their generation will be the one to bite the big one. I heard they discovered a tablet from ancient Mesopotamia where they predicted the world was going to end. Can you believe that? Back in Mesopotamia. Then after Mr. Horner had been quiet for a while, I said, didn't you say you had something to confess? Oh yeah, he laughed. He laughed too loud. I won't do it how loud he did. Well, Jesse, I suppose I'll come right out and say it. I took something from you. I said, you did? He said, I took your bike. I said, why? Mr. Horner said, I don't know. I don't know if it was because I was angry you took my gum or if I just wanted to have it. But I stole that bicycle from you. I made it up, though. I brought it back to you. I said, but this isn't my bike. He said, you can't have your bike. I said, that's okay. He said, you can't have your bike because I destroyed it. And I really don't know why I did that. I said, that's okay too. And I'll tell you what else, Mr. Horner. I want you to have this bike too. He said, really? But yes, I don't even want a bike anymore. I said, Mr. Horner, I really don't want a bike from you either. He said, okay. You do have to admit, though, it took a lot of guts to come here and admit what I'd done. And I said, it definitely took a lot of guts to come here. And Mr. Horner smiled. I guess you probably wanted to see me ride it around a bit. I said, okay. And he hopped on the big wheel and wheeled around the room in big circles. And as I saw those big wheels spin, the wheels in my head started spinning, so to speak. I said, now, Mr. Horner, how could you have stolen the bike? Mr. Horner said, Jesse, I apologize to you. It's not right to make a grown-up feel wrong once they've apologized. I said, no, I mean, you were in the store with me when the bike was stolen. How could you have possibly stolen the bike? He said, how could you have possibly stolen my gum? I said, I had a friend stand guard while I took it from the place where it was. Mr. Horner smiled. Well, maybe I had a friend to help me too. I said, did you? He said, maybe. Maybe it was just me and my shadow. And I said, wow, Mr. Horner, you're a real funny guy, aren't you? And he kept on with his unforgettable laugh. And I watched as the wheels on the bike went round and round for a few minutes before he finally rolled right out of my room. As you might imagine, I continued to struggle sleeping through the remainder of the evening. I continued to stare at the door, and I continued to think, shoo, you really can't take things which aren't yours. Then, a couple of hours after the sun came up, another knock came across my door. You can only imagine my relief when I heard my mother's voice. She said, honey, can I come in? I said, yes, Mama. And I figured this had probably all been a nightmare, because why was my mama knocking to come in? I was awake, of course. I wouldn't bore you with a story about a dream. But when the door fully opened, I was sure it was a nightmare, on account of Mama was standing next to two fully uniformed policemen. I knew the jig was up. I said, oh goodness, I'm so sorry about the bubblegum. I know it was wrong, and I know two wrongs don't make a right, but I really think you ought to hear what Mr. Horner's been up to. Then I heard a familiar voice booming down from behind the men. Hey there, little tattler. And I saw Mr. Horner. You know what they used to say back in our day about tattlers? And one of the officers said, no one likes them. And then Mr. Horner said, no, not that. They used to say, tattletales spit. Your tongue will be split, and all the dogs in town will have a bit. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Horner. I did not know that they said that, but please don't have me arrested. And the other police officer laughed and put his arm around Mr. Horner. Come on, Tim Horner. You're scaring the poor girl to death. And then the first officer, who actually looked identical to the second, said, don't worry, honey. This is the rare exception where everyone does like a tattler. Now, are you going to invite us in? I said, okay. He said, okay. Now tell us, did you see Mr. Horner yesterday? I said, yes. He said, did you and your friend, Gabriella ride bikes to his corner store and back? I said, yes. Well, we rode there and Gab rode back. But I had to go back to the store. The police officer said, oh yeah, and why'd you have to do that? And I said, well, I... And the first police officer said, Jesus, Gary, what's the matter with you? You know, we got what we need. No point in scaring the poor girl to death. And I said, oh, they got what they need. And I stuck my wrists out to get handcuffed like the fellas on TV. And you know what? Every one of the fellas laughed. Cop said, man, you really got this girl scared to death. I remember he kept saying that over and over. He must have just learned the phrase or something like that. I said, I don't understand. Am I not under arrest for stealing the gum? Stealing the what? Said my mama. And I could tell I was in for a whooping. I didn't care at that point. I said, fellas, what's going on? If it's not about the gum, what's all this about? And the officers chuckled. It's nothing. It's just Gabriella Heyman's missing. I said, she is? And the second officer said, yeah, she is. But she'll turn up in a few hours, I'm sure. You know, she probably just rode her bike to see another girlfriend, but Mama Heyman's gone pretty haywire over it. She's downright hysterical. I mean, for some reason, she seems to think poor Mr. Horner was involved. And I said, well, what's making her think that? The officer said, I don't even remember. It doesn't matter. You're saying you saw him at his store after she disappeared. There's no way he could have been involved. I said, there's no way? Why would you say that? And he said, it's Tim Horner. And I said, officers, I don't know that I would say there's no way Mr. Horner was involved. The officer said, no? You wouldn't say you saw him on your little gum joyride? And they all laughed. Even my mama laughed, although her eyes glistened red with anger like evil jewels. And I just said the same thing again. I said, officers, I would not say that there's no way Mr. Horner could not be involved. And the officer said, yeah, well, guess what? That sentence is confusing to me. Not say no way. I would not say there's no way a thing like that could happen in a town like ours. Especially not with Tim Horner involved. I mean, we gosh dang served together, excuse my language. It was then that I recognized that the two identical men shared a smell which was identical to Mr. Horner's. A smell which I could not yet recognize as the scent of stale beer. But what I did recognize was their authority. This was back in the day when even if you were upset, you recognized that the men whose job it is to protect you are probably just trying to do their jobs. I mean, people just didn't do things like what happened to Gab Gab back then. If anything happened to Gab Gab, we never found out what happened to Gab Gab. I mean, she probably just caught a wild hare and ran away. She was that kind of girl. After all that, two things never happened again. I never saw Gab Gab again. And I never stole anything ever again. I still think about it every time I drive by Mr. Horner's corner store. Of course, it's not Mr. Horner's corner store anymore. It's a CVS now. Everything seems to be a CVS now. I think Mr. Horner franchised it, though. At least he was manager till he got too old. Then his niece took over. Sweet girl. I just saw her the other day. I was taken aback. She just has this familiar way about her. I guess that makes sense. She's related to Mr. Horner, but I don't know. She has this sort of energy. I don't know how to explain it. Whenever I see her, I feel like I was supposed to be friends with her. You know what I mean? Not that you're actually going to go and make friends with the girl at CVS. Then you got to have a conversation with someone every time you go to buy a pickle. But I did have a sort of funny conversation with her the other day. I was at CVS with my daughter and a girlfriend, which is always sort of funny. They were going on about how CVS is a police state or something like that, just on account of there's an officer with a police dog at the door. I told her, well, what do you expect? Your whole generation is criminals and not one of you wants to work a bit. Of course they gotta start giving jobs out to the dogs. But I wasn't trying to fight. I was just there trying to buy a pickle. So I just sort of tuned her out. I always sort of tune out my daughter and her girlfriend, but all of a sudden, the girlfriend says, "Ooh, girl, where'd you get that?" And she pointed to the left hand of Mr. Horner's niece. She had a bracelet on, you see. It said, "What would Jesus do?" And I said, wow, that is so funny. You just don't see that anymore. And the Horner girl, I keep calling her a girl because of her job, but she's about my age. But the Horner girl must have figured there was no way my daughter's girlfriend of all people was asking about a bracelet which asked about Jesus Christ. Because she said, "What you mean, my ring?" And she stuck out her finger. She also had this funny looking ring on her hand. It is kind of funny, isn't it? Looked like a little kid could have made it. I thought maybe her kid had made it, and that's how come it was so ugly, looking like a dog chewed it up. But no, it had a bright red jewel in the center. But I said, "Oh girl, that's so pretty." She said, "Yeah, isn't it funny?"
I call it my bubblegum ring. The stone's just pink zirconium, but my husband got it for me, sort of an inside joke.
She even let me try it on. Isn't that funny? People just aren't friendly like that anymore. I tell you, my daughter and her girlfriend thought it was funny. They kept making their funny little jokes. Like, ooh, Mama's got a girlfriend. I'm telling Papa. I told him, you know what we used to say about tattletales in my day? But before I could recite that most violent of schoolyard taunts, I felt the ground beneath me shake, and the air by my ears start to crackle as 200 furry pounds of police dog came galloping towards me, barking like, whoa, 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 whoa. Then I heard a woman's voice barking even louder.
That's her! Stop, thief!
It was Mr. Horner's niece. Get this, I had accidentally walked off with her ring. I know. I can't believe it either. I gave it right back, of course. I was so embarrassed. I said, you gotta understand, I would never take something that didn't belong to me. But my daughter and her girlfriend kept on with their comedy, saying,
Oh, Mama, don't you know you just can't take what ain't yours? You just can't.
But the Horner girl turned real sweet soon as she saw the two-headed burden which the Lord made mine to bear. She said,
Hush, girls. It ain't right to make a grown-up feel wrong once they've apologized.
Then I handed her back her horrible ring and watched it slide onto her left hand.
Sorry I took you for a grifter. You don't really seem the type, but you know how it is nowadays. Everyone's the type to take what they want.
I said, oh, trust me, I know. Everyone in this generation's a criminal.
She said, oh, trust me, I know. I can't even keep the bubblegum by the door no more without someone trying to run off with it.
I said, terrible's what it is. Oh, and here I'm the most terrible of them all. You gotta do me a favor, though. You gotta go home and tell your uncle that Jesse McKellar stole a piece of bubblegum from you. She said, huh? I said, oh, it's an inside joke. Old man Horner's your uncle, isn't he? I thought I heard that. And then Mr. Horner's niece said,
oh, yeah, haha. Well, I better get back into the store before I get in trouble.
And my daughter's girlfriend said, Jesse, can we please go now? I exchanged a real done-up look with the Horner girl. Kids today, terrible's what it is. She said, end of the damn world's what it is. And I said, certainly seems that way. But then I hear it seems that way to every generation. I heard once that they found a stone tablet in ancient Mesopotamia saying the world was going to end. Can you believe that? She said, yeah, I think I heard about that once as well. And I said, well, not to speak ill of the Mesopotamians, but the world hasn't stopped spinning yet. The Horner girl said, no, not yet. Then again, I suppose it did for the Mesopotamians.